Thank you for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. This week we've got a very special episode, and I have two guests with me, David Bruns and R Olson. Welcome to the show, fellas.
Thank you, Hank.
Thank you.
Well, before we get in, and there's a reason that we have both of you on this week. You guys are doing a joint project that is awesome and looks like is just going through the roof with success at the moment. But before we get into that, I would like you to give us a little information about who you are and how you came to writing. David, you want to jump in and start?
Sure. So I came to writing full-time actually in sort of the middle of 2013. I was between jobs and was planning on taking the summer off, and my wife, I traveled quite a bit prior to that, and my wife says, "Look, you can take the summer off, but you better find something to do." So I was hunting around for, I was going to volunteer here, volunteer there, and she said, "You've always said you're going to write a book, so do that." And I said, "Actually, that's a really good idea." So the next day, I said, "Okay, let's get this book written." I had written a lot of stories as a kid, and have always been a big reader, but had never managed to finish an entire novel writing one. So I sat down and hammered it out. I did 5 pages a day and learned a lot in the process about outlining and everything. And I finished it and showed it to a few people after a few months, and got some good feedback on it. And then started to look at publishing options, and just looked at the whole agent blind query process and just said, "Wow, this is just ridiculous." So I learned a lot about self-publishing and had a mentor here in the area who helped me put together a first book and self-publish it. And it got to the end of the summer, and I said, "Geez, I think I'd like to keep doing this." So we took a look at the financial situation and made some adjustments, and that's what I do now. Since then, that was middle of 2013. Since then, I've written a 3-book science fiction series, this project that JR and I are working on, and a handful of short stories, and it's just been a tremendous ride. I mean, I can't tell you how much happier I am doing this as to some of the things that I was doing before.
I can imagine. What about you, JR? What's your background?
Yeah, so the interesting thing here is that Dave and I are both graduates of the U.S. Naval Academy. He was class of 1988, and I was in the class of 1990, so a couple years after him. We didn't know each other at school or anything like that. We actually bumped into each other here in Minnesota at a monthly all-service academy breakfast that happens every month, and that's West Point, Air Force Academy, Annapolis grads, etc. So we got to know each other, and that was about 4 years ago now that we first met. Yeah. But during that time, I retired from the Navy after 21 years in March of 2011. So 4 years ago now. And one of the things that I put on my bucket list of things I wanted to do after I finally hung it up from the Navy was to write a screenplay and to write a novel. That was one of the things I wanted to do, both of those things. Well, I actually succeeded in writing a screenplay, also co-written with another friend of mine, on the Falklands War, and I really enjoyed the give and take of that creative opportunity to work with somebody collaboratively on a big project, a big writing project. And Dave and I were asked at one point if we would go and serve as guest speakers for the Naval Academy Parents Club here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And so we both did. We both agreed to do it, and we told our stories. And Dave mentioned the fact that he had decided to become a professional writer. And I mentioned that I had a career as an intelligence officer in the Navy. And one of the parents suggested that we should write a novel together. So we kicked that idea around for a little while, and we decided to do it. So that was just about almost a year ago. So that's how we jumped into this effort, and we just about there, ready to publish.
We lost you there just at the end, JR. Could you repeat the last thing that you said?
what was the last thing I said?
Yeah. Basically, he was saying that with that meeting with the Parents Club happened about a year ago, actually almost a year ago to the day. I think it was last March, and we got together after that and then started writing in the summer.
Excellent. JR, what's the difference for you between screenwriting and novel writing? How do those two processes? How are they similar and how are they different?
Oh yeah, that's that's a really good question, actually. And I'll tell you that I had absolutely no experience doing either one of these things before I went ahead and took them on. The screenwriting process was one of those ones where, there's a very specific format you have to use when you draft a screenplay. And a set number of pages. I mean, if you go beyond 129 pages, for instance, for a feature-length film, no producer is even going to open up the screenplay to read the first page. They literally flip to the very last page of the screenplay and say, 135 pages, not interested, too long, right?
Now, is it true that the page count equals or is a rough estimation to the minutes that a film would last?
Yeah, so in theory, yes. I mean,
Okay.
I've never made a movie before, but what I learned in the process of drafting the screenplay and talking with some producers and other screenwriters and whatnot is that, yes, it's about a minute a page, roughly.
Gotcha.
But that's give and take depending upon what the action sequences are. But the idea behind the screenplay is that, everything you're putting down on the page, you have to visualize what that would look like on the screen, right?
Right.
And that's fundamentally different than writing a novel, because in the novel, as you're drafting the novel, and Dave is much better at this writing part of the novel than I am. But to me, it's sort of like you want the reader to sort of take from that what they want, I think, and you give them many options in the way you draft the story to visualize it in their own minds as to what's actually happening, what the scene looks like, so to speak.
Right.
I mean, you outline it, but you don't do it to nearly the exacting degree as you might in a screenplay, if that makes sense.
Sure. And then, so did anything happen with the screenplays that you worked on?
Well, we're that's the other thing about screenplays is they never they're never finished until a movie is actually wrapped, right?
Right.
and it's up there on the screen for everybody to watch, unless you're George Lucas, right? And in which case you keep changing things forever, however long the movie exists.
Oh man.
But so we're still working on that, my friend James and I. But it's about the Falklands War, and it's I really like the idea that it's historically accurate. And one of the things that Dave and I chose to do right up front with this novel that we've drafted together is we tried to weave the story into actual historical events that have occurred over the last decade. And for me, reading a novel, especially those military thriller type novels, I really enjoy the ones where it's a story woven into real life events. It seems more believable that way. I don't know, Dave, what do you think? Is that what you find too?
Yeah, I mean, we when we started the project, we really set out with a couple of guidelines, and one of them was really authenticity. I mean, both of us are ex-military, so we know how military people think and speak and act. So we felt like we had that part covered, but we really wanted to weave it into actual events. So you have the reader saying, wait a minute, it didn't really happen like that, did it? Those to me are some of the best kinds of stories, because you cross the line between fact and fiction, and you get people scratching their head and saying, well, it could have happened like this.
Right.
So yeah, we were pretty dead set on that right from the beginning.
Yeah. And you give the reader a little bit of the feeling that they walk away from the novel with a little bit of maybe inside info that no one else knows. When you give that what if story, it makes for great conversation starters for sure.
Yeah.
David, what about your other books that you've written? You mentioned that you have written a science fiction trilogy.
Yep.
How was that process like for you? You said that you retired, you were looking for something else to do, so you thought you had a book in you, and how did you go from a military career to writing science fiction?
Yeah, so I left the military after 6 years. I was in submarines, and unfortunately, in Weapons of Mass Deception, there's no submarines. We're going to fix that in our next book. But so I left in the mid '90s, and I did about 20 years in the corporate private sector, mostly in high tech. I worked with companies like Intel, and a lot of activity in Silicon Valley, a lot of time in Asia. I spent a ton of time overseas, both living there and also traveling there. So when I set out to write the first book, I sort of had the idea for the book, and started with that idea, wrote it, and and then self-publish it, and then realized if I was going to do this thing seriously, I really needed to have a series. And I realized with the first book, I had actually started the book in the middle of the series. So I said, why don't I go back and tell the story? The name of the series is called the Dream Guild Chronicles. The first book is actually called The Dream Guild, but it takes place way later. So I realized that I should really go back and tell the origin story. So the first one is very heavily science fiction. It's on a fictional world, people with telepaths, and they're on a ticking time bomb because their son's about to go supernova. So and there's a whole backstory with children that need to get off the planet. And then the follow-on books each take one character from that first book and expand it onto the world where they get settled. One of those is on Earth. It's in Incan times, and then one is on an Earth sister planet. So it was a lot of fun to read them, or write them rather. A lot of fun to get feedback from readers. And I found going through this process, I learned a lot about genre. I learned a lot about finding readers, because I didn't really consider that explicitly when I was writing, but I found I had two groups of readers, one which I kind of suspected, and one which was a total surprise. The one that I expected was people who like old school science fiction, people who grew up with the original Star Trek, so usually late 40s plus men with beards generally.
Or guys in their early 40s with beards.
Yeah. But people who sort of value old school sci-fi and sort of how it's told. And the other group, which completely surprised me, was high potential middle graders, like sort of 11, 12, 13-year-old middle graders who are typically read above their grade level.
Yeah.
The characters are 13, 14, 15 years old. And it's their growing up story. So these kids just ate it up. And I can't tell you how many people I worked with who, and they were sort of corporate people, but gave the book to their kids. And I got all these emails from kids who were like 12 and 13 years old. Oh my God, I love this book. When are you going to write the next one? I'm like, where is this coming from?
Well, something with my own kids, I've noticed. My wife and I have 5 kids, and we have 3 girls, which are right between the 2 boys. And my girls are huge dystopian sci-fi fans, and my girls are girly girls. Like there's, it has been the biggest surprise for me, some of the stuff that they really read and geek out on, and there's something about this kind of new wave of sci-fi that has opened up a lot of new readers to the genre, and it's really blown me away. And to hear you say that just really solidifies what I've seen with my own kids.
Yeah, I mean, I did not see that coming at all. I mean, the first time I had an inkling of it is I have a 10-year-old nephew who is a very high reader and read it and loved it and just could not wait for the next one. I am like the coolest uncle now, by the way.
Of course.
And then I have 2 twin nieces who also read it and loved it, and they're in the 12, 13-year-old range. So again, it was completely unexpected. And then friends of mine who gave it to their kids, and then I started getting this feedback. It's just very, very gratifying and very unexpected.
That's awesome. And the series sounds really incredible. If I were going to start reading, which book? I know you said you wrote actually the fourth book first, the
Yes.
Dream Guild,
Yes.
and then went back and wrote the
Yeah.
other three. Do you recommend starting at book one, or do you
I would
recommend starting?
they start with book one of the series, which is called Irradiance.
Okay.
And eventually I will take book four, which was my very first book and done with a different editor. I'll take it and I'll probably republish it because there's some things in there that I'd like to change. But right now, between this project and Apocalypse Weird and the other things, it's just not really on the plate at the moment.
Who did your covers? Your covers look really incredible.
I use a guy. His name is Stephen Novak. Really good, really fast. We've developed kind of this shorthand where I send him an email with a description of what I'm looking for, and he comes back with something almost, right out of the gate. As a matter of fact, the third book in the series called Sacrifice, the one with the greenish cover.
Yeah.
I sent him an email. He sent me the cover like a day later, and I looked at it and I said, it's perfect. And I felt.
Don't you love it when it works that way?
I felt sort of stupid saying, oh, yeah, I want this font. I'm like, I showed it to my wife. I'm like, am I just not being critical enough? She says, I think it looks pretty good. So, I basically took it right out of the gate.
That's great. You also wrote an excellent novella in Tales from Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah.
And tell us about the Yesterday Adjustment.
Sure. So again, old school sci-fi, right?
Yeah.
Even the name. So last summer, I was reading Pennsylvania, and coincidentally, I was on vacation back east, and we were going through Lancaster. We actually stopped and got like the little Amish tour thing.
Nice.
And I was reading it, and I said to my wife, I really kind of like to write a story in this universe. She's like, well, why don't you email the guy and ask him? So I did. I just emailed Michael Bunker out of the blue and said, hey, you don't know me from Adam, but, do you mind if someone writes fan fiction? And he says, go for it. So I went ahead and wrote it, and then I found out about the AZ afterwards. I didn't even know about that going in. Chris Porteau actually turned me on to that. I wrote it and released it. I released it at the same time as I released the third novel in the series, Sacrifice. I did a double release because it was done, and so it was great. It was actually I didn't know what I'd think about writing fan fiction, but it turned out to be a really great experience because you've got certain parameters that you're writing around that are fixed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can do whatever you want within that space. So it was really actually a great experience. And anybody, so the fan fiction kind of gets a bad rap, but I got to tell you, I'm a fan of fan fiction now.
Well, yeah, and it's really maturing and coming into its own as a not as a genre, but as a viable structure to work in. It's really there's been several authors that have launched just from getting their feet wet by writing in someone else's world. And people ask me all the time what I think of it, and I haven't done much fan fiction writing, but it seems like a really great way for an author to really immerse themselves and to start learning the craft, especially.
Yeah, and even more, I think it's a way for the more successful, more established author to give back. And, Hugh Howey did that. I think Michael Bunker did that. And so these guys are sort of passing it on, which is really great. I mean, that's it's a sign of confidence in them, and it's also a sign of generosity of spirit, I think, that is one of the things that I really love about the indie community. JR and I had a whole discussion in the summer about whether we were going to try to traditionally publish this or independently publish this. And, JR I think felt initially that we should go the agent route. And, we actually wrote a blog post eventually that says this is why we're going to self-publish, because even he looked at all the data and sort of looked at the process and said, man, we have a sort of an end date of this book in 2016, and we'd like to have the book published before then.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into this story a little bit. So we've
Sure.
got you two guys meet at this function where you both come to speak at. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. And you meet there, and some people suggest that you should get together and do something creative. And how do we go from there to two Navy guys and a novel?
You want to take it? Take that one, Jr.
Sure. So, well, we had actually known each other a little before we went in to speak at that Parents Club meeting. So we had become friends before that. And when the suggestion was made, I just kind of laughed it off. But David actually got a hold of me, I think a couple of days later, and he said, we should do it. And so I said, sure, why not? So we got together for lunch. And we sort of discussed in general what that would mean, and then we started almost immediately kicking around big picture ideas for what should this novel be about. And then we sort of decided we should go ahead and sit down and be very mindful about how to establish our characters and the big story arc. And so that we worked at that for a while to make sure that we understood exactly what it was we wanted to draft. And then it was a number of working sessions where we sat down and we outlined together, kind of in general, what each of the chapters would look like. And we had no idea how many chapters we were going to have when we first started the outlining process. Literally, we had no idea.
Yeah.
And what we decided to do, we kicked around some different ideas because, like with the screenplay thing, both James and I would draft, scenes here and there, and then we'd work off each other's drafts and whatnot. But a screenplay, like I said earlier, is a very different animal than a novel. And to have a novel make sense to a reader, it really needs to be in one person's voice, right? It needs to be written the same way all the way through.
Right. And
Dave is a very, I think, an excellent writer. So we decided that it was going to be Dave that did the writing, and I contributed, I think, by doing the detailed outlines for each of the chapters. So I put my naval intelligence background, 21 years as an intel officer, to work. Did the research, did a little bit of the draft of what it would, what I envisioned it to look like, and then Dave took it and ran with it. And he'd send each chapter draft to me, and I'd start reading through it. And I told him a few times, I said, "Man, I did not see that coming." that was excellent. So it was a great process. It was really a collaborative effort, and that I felt really good about. As we kept working through chapter after chapter after chapter, my respect for Dave as a writer just kept getting deeper and deeper each week. And I was so impressed with how fast he was able to gin out each chapter after I finished the outlines. At one point I said, "Hey man, you got to slow down. I can't keep up." So, but we got, through the whole first draft. We did a second revision, and then finally a third revision where we actually shared screen on Skype and went through literally word for word for the entire draft.
Read through the whole thing.
To get it down to the point where we felt pretty good about it. And that was the draft that we actually sent out to our beta readers. And Dave, I'll kick it over to you to pick up from there.
Yeah, so we were pretty deliberate about the beta process. I had wanted to actually punch it to our edit. So I used I ever since my first book in the series, I've used the same editor. Her name is Sarah Cole Williams. She's here in Minneapolis. Fabulous editor. I work great with her. And I wanted to use her. She was going to be out of the country for from the middle of December to the end of January. So she says, why don't you give it to beta readers over the Christmas holiday, and then I can pick it up on the 1st of February. And initially I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to give it to her. I want to push this thing along. And then I'm like, man, there's no way I'm going to find another editor. And go through finding her was just hard enough. So we changed horses and we said, okay, we're going to do a beta read first. So we finished this revision with this big read through the first week of December, and we had selected 12 beta readers. We had some active duty military guys, we had an FBI agent, we had someone who was from Iran, and then we had some people who were sort of casual readers, and some who were thriller enthusiasts, and actually really were really purposeful about it. So we even went so far as to at certain points in the book, at the 20% point, the 60% point, I think it was the 80% point, we had a little questionnaire that said, you're 20% of the way through the book. Are you hooked yet? Who's your favorite character? Make a couple notes so that you don't forget by the time you get to the end, right? So of those 12, we expected to lose 3 or 4 because it was the holidays. And I mean, this is a 400-page book, right? But we 11 of the 12 delivered. So we were pretty surprised about that. Really good feedback, but there were 2, I would call them catastrophic flaws, which we needed to go back and fix. So we did another rewrite in January, and then the final revision went to Sarah, the beginning of February.
So to get back to the mechanics for just a moment
Yep.
of 2 guys writing a novel, and this is a really interesting dynamic that you 2 have that I haven't really heard before, where you've got one person outlining and plotting and another one kind of taking that outline and fleshing it out. I think that the natural question would be, David, what is it like to write to someone else's outline? But I would also love to hear, JR, what is it like having someone take your initial thoughts and then create something around them?
You want to go first, JR?
Sure. Well, it's funny because when we would get together for these working group sessions about every 7 to 10 days, and we would sit down and we'd outline, 6 or 8 chapters, sort of big picture, figure out, okay, whose point of view is the chapter going to be from? What do we want to accomplish in this chapter as far as the story arc goes? And then I would take it and do that outline, and that would be anything from, sort of big picture stuff, technical data, things along those lines. Maybe just sort of hey, this is what I think needs to happen in this chapter. And then Dave would take it. And a few times, because I felt strongly about what was happening in the chapter, I actually went ahead and did a draft of the chapter myself. But knowing full well that when I gave it to Dave, he would do his magic and it would come out, really good. And there were a couple of times where I gave him what I thought should be happening there, and what came back was totally it had nothing to do with the outline that I'd given him, but it was really good. So, and I'm all about the collaboration. I don't have any kind of I'm not emotionally invested in any of the chapters that we're doing. It's really more about, what's the end product, and is this an exciting story to read? And Dave's experience, writing the other 4 books and whatnot, really paid off for us because, he understood the mechanics of the writing piece much more than I did as far as novels go. And what he came back to me with on that first draft of, the actual first draft of the chapter, I liked it. I mean, it was a lot of fun to see how the creative process would work out for us. I mean, from my perspective, anyway.
Yeah. So just picking up on that. I mean, so I think that's actually been the really interesting part of this. I mean, the first thing I would say about any collaboration is, we don't really think of it in terms of who's putting in more hours or who's doing more work. It's more a case of, we sort of have loosely defined roles. So the overall plotting of the story and where the story's going and where it's going to end is a joint effort. And the working out the timeline and working out this chapter is from this point of view, and this is what's going to happen in this chapter, is done jointly. JR takes that and he would write a detailed outline. The thing that's different about writing a thriller set in modern day versus writing science fiction is you got to be accurate about the details. So there's a lot of research that goes into some of this stuff. Like we did a section where there's a scene with Somali pirates. I've never met a Somali pirate, right? I don't know what the heck is going on there, but JR did all that research and he has a lot of background. So, that is really invaluable. And anybody who, just picture this, because you're a writer, and any writers who are listening to this, imagine having someone who's A, emotionally invested in your project, B, at the same place you are in terms of being up to speed, can edit something at the drop of a hat, or you can talk over a plot point with them, or you can have them, if you're going on to do Kickstarter or something, you can split up the efforts there. It's tremendously helpful to have that partner, but you sort of have to get past, well, I worked 10 hours and he worked 8 hours, so therefore it's not. No, it's a partnership, right?
Right.
So the process for us actually worked pretty smoothly, but going in, we didn't really know if it was going to work at all, actually. I remember, I think it was the second chapter I gave JR, and he sent it back. He says, "This is not going to work, man." He says, so I finally gave it to my wife, and I told her what the comment was, and she's like, "Yeah, I can see it, but really it's all about this kind of one sentence." But we just scrapped the chapter, and we were still figuring out characters at that point, and we had it was a female character, and we didn't know what the heck we were doing with it. And that was actually one of the major rewrite points for us, was going back and rewriting that character soup to nuts.
Gotcha. So what's the premise of the story?
So this was originally JR's idea, so I'm going to let him tell this one.
Okay.
So what we kicked around in that very first lunch meeting where we decided we were going to go ahead and do this book together was this idea that maybe there really were some nuclear weapons that the Iraqis had before 2003, when the U.S. invaded and eventually ousted Saddam Hussein. And what if, just like in the first Gulf War, when the Iranian Air Force was all sort of, flown over to Iran for quote unquote safekeeping, about 130 aircraft, Iran never gave those planes back to Iraq. They kept them as war reparations for the Iran-Iraq War. Well, what if Saddam Hussein figured out a way to smuggle some, his nuclear weapons out of Iraq before the invasion, and got them to a place where somebody could keep them safe and husband them and maybe use them in the future. So that's kind of the opening premise of where we go with that book. And then it's a process of, well, how do we track down those weapons that we think don't even exist, right? And how do all these storylines of all these different characters, both protagonists and antagonists, woven together over a course of 13 and a half years, how do we bring that to a conclusion?
Yeah. Okay, now just between me and you, JR, that's just between me and you. No one else is listening. As a Navy intelligence officer, how much of this is true and how much is not? I won't tell anyone, I swear.
Well, I'll tell you what. Like Dave said, one of the things that we really wanted to have in this storyline was technical accuracy, right?
Right.
To me and to Dave and to every military person I've ever known who's ever watched a movie about the military or read a book about the military or seen a documentary, nothing galls us more than when the production is just rife with errors, right?
Right.
Because it's so easy to get it accurate. It just takes a little bit of time and effort in getting some technical advisors to tell you what's true and what's not.
Sure.
So the book is technically accurate. As far as, is it fiction or is it truth? I signed a non-disclosure agreement that means I have to keep the secrets for 70 years or until I die. And, you can go to jail for violating that thing.
Absolutely.
So I would tell you that everything in this story is fiction.
Yeah.
But it could happen.
It's
right?
plausible.
Yeah.
It's plausible.
Right.
In fact, it's very plausible.
Sure.
Let's put it that way.
But I can't tell you how many times when we're having these story meetings and we're stuck and JR says, "What if this happened?" And he sort of gets this funny look on his face, and I'm like, okay.
I know where this
is going. He says,
going.
well, so it says, I'm just saying, something like this could have happened. So
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I was talking to Weston Oakes one time. He wrote a series of books uh, called SEAL Team 666, and it's about a fictional SEAL team that battles supernatural creatures, and he's very he's former military and now is a military contractor, and he's very meticulous with the details of equipment and things like that. And he was telling me that he gets pinged in emails all the time from people, that say, "Oh, you got this wrong," and this and that. And he said, "Well, it's fiction, and I had to dial it back a little bit so that we're not telling exactly what's going on in the world at this moment. This is fiction at the end of the day."
we did some dialing back.
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
We deliberately dialed a few things back, partly on the advice of some of our beta readers, and partly just because we got a little bit uncomfortable. Just because we know something doesn't mean, and it's not classified doesn't mean we have to say it.
Exactly. Sometimes prudence is just the way to go.
And on that point, I mean, keep in mind, both David and I had top secret clearances, during our times in the military. And as an intelligence officer, I am very aware that we are in a state of war out there, right?
Sure.
To a certain extent. And our allies and friends are under threat all the time, too. So you don't want to give away anything that's going to be so close to reality that somebody could use that, right?
Right.
So that's why we had to dial some of that stuff back as well.
Totally understood.
Yeah.
Why did you guys choose to launch a Kickstarter for this project?
That is a great question. David, go ahead.
Yeah, so we did it for a couple of reasons. One is that we really wanted to do something special with this book and do a really nice hardback edition. Partly because I've had a lot of people approach me over the years, relatives and friends, and maybe they're not science fiction readers, and they're like, man, hey, as soon as you write something in the suspense or thriller category, I'm in. But how could I help out? And partly because it's almost like a mini book launch. The things that you need to do to get ready for a Kickstarter So we decided to do a Kickstarter for a couple of reasons. One was I've had a lot of people over time ask me how they can support me, and not all of them read science fiction. So asking them to buy my books is fine, but what I really want is readers. So this was a way for people to help out. It was also a way for us to do a little advertising prior to the book launch. Everything you need to do a book launch, you need to have in place to do a really good Kickstarter. You need to think through the story of why you wrote the book in the first place. You need to have the book pitched together. You need to have a cover. All these things need to be in place, and that really it really helped us solidify a lot of the details going forward. We had actually considered doing a Kickstarter last fall before the book had even gone to the editor, and then torpedoed that idea and decided that we were going to not talk about doing a Kickstarter until the book was 100% complete, because we wanted to have the time between when we did the Kickstarter and when we were launching the gifts back to people, that time to be relatively short. Probably the most important reason, though, is we really wanted to do something nice with this, a really nice hardbound edition. And that has been the reward level, the gift level that people have really latched onto. As a matter of fact, that's been the most popular gift level for us of all the other levels combined. So we've got, 25 people or so or 20 people who want paperbacks, but that hardback, I think there's like 55 or 56 people who have signed up for that.
Yeah.
For that gift level. So it's been a really great experience to go through and reconnect with people, tell them about what I'm doing. As a matter of fact, just one anecdotal story. We had a guy that I worked for, a West Point guy, that I worked for when I got out of the Navy. He was one of my first bosses. I worked for him for probably 3 or 4 years. I emailed him. I haven't spoken to him in probably 5 years. I emailed him last night and told him what was going on and how I had left the corporate gig and become a full-time writer. It was a lifelong dream, and directed him to the Kickstarter. He contributed $500.
Shut up. That is awesome.
Really?
Wow.
I mean, it just, fall off your chair, generosity.
That is incredible.
So, yeah. So, I mean, today we're at 140% of funding. We wanted to raise $4,000, and we're at 56 something today. And the Kickstarter runs until Friday at midnight.
Excellent.
So we've been really just overwhelmed by the generosity of people who have, just going there and listening to that 3-minute pitch, I'm happy.
Yeah.
If you decide to contribute after that, I mean, I'm even happier.
Sure.
So we're really looking forward to putting this really nice collector's edition hardback. And these guys, someday when we're on the New York Times bestseller list, that'll be worth some real money, right?
That's right. And I think you guys are really using Kickstarter to its best advantage. That I think some people think that people will do these Kickstarter campaigns as a way of pre-funding things, but you guys had the product finished before launching the Kickstarter, and just using that to get this incredible amount of buzz and goodwill with people, I think is a really incredible use of that tool.
Yeah, and so the thing about Kickstarter is, and we didn't really realize this going in, but anything you read about it from reputable sources is going to tell you this. When you do crowdfunding, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, whatever, they're the funding platform. You need to bring your own crowd.
Right.
Out of our 60-some supporters, I think only 3 have come from Kickstarter. Everyone else has come directed there from an external site, either directly by us through my website or through emails we're sending out or through Facebook. And even Facebook is not that productive as a funding tool because there's so much screening going on with the Facebook algorithms.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe out of less than 10% of the funding of the funders have been directed there by Facebook. The vast majority has been us point to point, going to our network and going to people we know and asking for their support.
Excellent. So what's next? You guys, when the Kickstarter ends this Friday, it's already funded, as you said, and you guys are over. Did you do any stretch goals, or say if we hit this and go over, we'll do such and such?
So we haven't set an explicit stretch goal. We did talk in the pitch about wanting to do an audiobook. And the thought there was to raise enough money to pre-fund production on an audiobook, but that can get pretty expensive. So we are going to do an audiobook. It's a case of when. There's the financial model of how many free coupons you get from Audible versus how many books you buy and at what price got a little head hurting. So we are going to do an audiobook, but we didn't set it as an explicit stretch goal.
Gotcha. So when will the book be available?
We've set a launch date. It's going to be May 15th.
Okay. Soon.
So the book has gotten back from the editor. We're doing the final touches on that and interior formatting for the paperback. We're going to make sure the paperback's done first. We'll have ARCs available in the next couple of weeks. So if any of your listeners are interested in an ARC, they can track us down on Facebook and private message me or visit my website, which is my name, David Bruns, BRUNS.com, and drop me a note, and we can talk about it.
You got it. And I will include a link in the show notes to have people specifically go do that. Guys, it's been a great conversation. Thank you both for coming on the show. This is an exciting project. I can't wait to get my hands on it, and I'm going to go over to Kickstarter and drop some in the bucket for you guys as well. And I highly encourage everyone else to do that as well. One note before we go. David, earlier today, I was talking to my really good friend Stefan Boltz, and he said, I'm reading David Bruns' new story, I, Caroline, this evening. And I was like, oh, great. Well, let me know what you think of it. It's in my to-be-read pile and on my Kindle. And he said, okay, so we're in the middle of talking a little while ago, and my phone buzzed, and I get this text from Stefan, and he said, oh, my gosh, this story is amazing. So tell David that I loved it, and I'm running over to write a review right now.
Yeah, I just actually see he just posted something on Facebook that just popped up as we were talking.
Awesome.
So yeah, I mean, really, it was extremely nice of him. That story, I actually had hoped to get it into one of the Samuel Peralta's anthologies, but they were all full. But you know, I had the story and I wanted to write it and wanted to get it out there, so it is there.
And that's the beauty of self-publishing.
Yes, exactly.
You've got stuff, and you know, it's you have a platform. That's excellent. Yeah. So before we go, tell me what is up next for you guys. We're going to launch this book. Are you guys going to collaborate anymore? Are there plans for any more novels, or JR, or are you writing more screenplays? What can we be watching for from you guys?
You want to take that one, JR?
Sure. So the screenplay is an ongoing project. I'm hoping that somebody will eventually option this thing. We've got a couple of a production company down in Australia that's interested in it. The Falklands War, obviously, that's something that people in the Commonwealth are a little more focused on than your typical American.
Yeah.
And you know, Argentina as well. But we're going to keep working on that. If David is amenable, and I hope he is, and I would love to collaborate with him again on another story with our protagonists. We deliberately drafted this book with some protagonists that we felt we could use again in a future set of stories.
Yeah, so we haven't talked explicitly about it. I mean, we're really focused on getting through the Kickstarter and getting the book launched and sort of getting that out into the world. This is probably the first really big launch I've done. Everything else, you know, I've launched the books and I've done some work around it, but you know, I've learned a lot about putting books together and launching them. I'm trying to bring all that home in this. So JR would like to mention that he's take a crack at the writing end of it, and he's drafted a novella we'll be releasing in June rather, about some that used some of the characters from the book because there is a South American connection, and also relates to some current events. The Alberto Nisman mysterious death that just happened a couple of months ago down in Argentina. So we haven't explicitly looked about the book, but I think there's probably a better than even shot it's going to happen.
We got to get this first one right, though.
Yeah, that's right.
Start worrying about the
yeah.
Excellent. Well, David Bruns and J.R. Olson, thank you so much for taking time out of your Sunday evening to come on the show with me. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Hank.
And it's been a pleasure. Thank you.